Well, hey everybody, I'm Nick Pettit at NickRP on Twitter, and I'm a web design teacher here at Treehouse, which of course is the best way to learn about web design, web development, mobile business, and so much more. You can check us out at teamtreehouse.com, which I have up right here. So when you hit teamtreehouse.com, this is what it will look like. You can click on the free trial button to try it out. 14 days for free. And once you log in, this is what it will look like. You have a dashboard so you can keep track of your learning. You can head over to our tracks, which are guided paths that teach you everything you need to know about a particular topic, such as iOS, web design, Rails, PHP, Android, and so much more. Or you can browse individual courses in our library, and you can watch live broadcasts like this one right now. So it's pretty cool. Definitely be sure to check that out. Today, I would like to talk to you about how I rapidly prototype websites. There's a bunch of different ways to do this, and there's really no right way. Everyone does it a little bit different, so you should definitely take what I say with a grain of salt and work it into your own workflow. However, I feel like the things that I do aren't totally unique, but they're a little bit different than some of the more traditional ways of mocking up websites. This can be useful if you're working on small to medium-sized projects, or if you just want to create, a one-off web page where you want to get something out really quick, but you still want it to look nice. Traditionally, a lot of web designers will do one of two things. They'll either start making a website in a program like Photoshop or Illustrator, and they'll create these pixel-perfect mock-ups that can then be transferred onto the web by slicing up the images or basically transforming it into HTML and CSS and creating a website that way. I think that is a pretty cumbersome way to do things. Another way that a lot of web designers and devs will work is they will create a static HTML and CSS mockup and then hand that over to developers to turn into dynamic code, whether that's in Rails or PHP or some other back-end language. And I also think that that is a little bit overly complicated, and there's much faster ways where you can go from design to something that people are actually using. So I say prototype because you can either work very iteratively, where you create a small set of design and features and then work your way up to something more complex, or you can create one prototype after another. So you create a prototype and then start again and throw out what you had previously. Like I said, there's a bunch of different ways to work, and there's really no correct way. It should always be whatever works best for you. So I wrote 2 blog posts that you may want to check out that are related to this. One is called How I Rapidly Prototype Websites, and this covers a lot of what I will be talking about today, only in text form, so you can check that out if you'd like. I'm sure Chris Zabriskie over here will put that into chat if you'd like to see that. And then there's another blog post that's related to what I was just talking about called PSD to HTML is dead. And this got quite a big response. I didn't really expect people to react as intensely as they did. There was a lot of people on both sides of the argument saying, well, obviously PSD to HTML is dead. And then there were other people saying, well, no, this is most definitely how you should be making websites, etc., and everything in between. But that's another good article to read, just to learn a little bit more detail about why I think that creating PSDs or Photoshop documents and turning them into HTML is maybe not the most efficient way to work, at least for me. So those are two really good blog posts to check out. So instead of creating a Photoshop document or creating static HTML and CSS and transforming that into the final product, what I like to do is start out with pen and paper. I will close my laptop and I think about what are all the things that I want to see on a page or even on the entire website if I'm starting out with something a little bit larger. And I'll list them all out. I'll say, here's maybe the major sections of the site that I think I'm going to need. Or alternatively, I'll say, here's all of the major features that I would like this site or this web app to be able to perform. And then I can break them out into different sections. It just depends on the project. So make sure to keep that in mind. There's no right way to work. So after listing everything out, I'll think about maybe how the features relate to one another, see if I can remove any of those features, because every feature you add is going to add work at every angle. You're going to have to design it, code it, you're going to have to support it later on. You may have to fix things when it breaks. You have to modify them. So every little thing you add is going to inflate the size of the project. So when listing out features like that, you should always think about what would be the consequences of not doing something. So try to eliminate as much as possible. And when you think you have it down to its basic component parts, try to even combine features if it makes sense to do so. You always want to make sure that each feature is very clear and each page on a website is very clear in its purpose. But sometimes you can add a little bit to one feature or a little bit to one page that actually makes another page or another feature completely irrelevant or redundant. So once you've really narrowed it down, that's when you can kind of start drawing shapes, and you can draw those out on pen and paper. Sometimes I will actually use a mock-up tool such as OmniGraffle or Balsamiq Mockups, and I'll show you how I do that in Balsamiq Mockups in just a moment. But sometimes I will use a tool if maybe I need to share these drawings with other people, whether those are stakeholders or clients or other people on a team that I'm working with. And that just keeps it in a digital format that's really easily shareable. So let's actually take a look at Balsamiq Mockups right now. This is Balsamiq Mockups. It's a desktop tool for mocking up websites and iPhone apps. You can also, drag out an iPhone just like that, and you can put in like a keyboard down at the bottom here and maybe an alert box. So it allows you to really quickly mock up interfaces just like that. So I'm going to delete all this stuff. You can do the same thing, of course, for websites. So you can drag out a browser window and you can resize this however you'd like, and then you can put things inside of it. One thing that I personally really like about Balsamiq Mockups versus a tool like OmniGraffle or even an illustration tool like Illustrator is that they have these pre-built components, and they also have this really nice default hand-drawn style. So everything is, for the most part, in black and white, and all of the lines for each one of these shapes are kind of squiggly. I'm not sure if you can perfectly see that on video, but these lines are not perfect, and that helps to communicate that this is just a mock-up. It's not something that's meant to be finalized, and it's not, it's not that the app is actually going to be black and white with these lines like this. It helps to communicate that this is more so a nice drawing, basically. So, like I said, you can just drag out components and drag in buttons and kind of customize them however you'd like. It's really pretty easy to work with, and that's why I like using Balsamiq Mockups. So let's say, for instance, that we were creating some sort of to-do list app. And we wanted to make sure that we were designing mobile first in mind. We wanted to build something that's going to be great on phones, but then can also scale up to a tablet or a desktop layout if need be. But we want to think mobile first because it's a to-do list, and we know that people are going to want to use this on the go. So I'll drag out an iPhone here, and let's see if we can find some sort of check boxes. There we go. That was actually pretty lucky. I just clicked right there, and there it is. So we can drag that in there, and we'll customize these in just a moment. Let's look for some text, and there we go. So we can call this my to-do list and just put that up there at the top. And then maybe we can add a few buttons to allow people to add and remove items. So let's see if there's some buttons here that would make sense. Maybe I can add a button here that says add. So we'll put that there. And of course, we'd want to think a lot more about how we're actually designing this, but you get the idea. One thing that I also do when I'm not working super quickly like this is that I will try to design from the inside out. So for example, I would worry about what this to-do list is really going to look like and function like, and then I would move outward from there and say, okay, here are the pieces of functionality I need to actually modify that to-do list, like this add button. And then moving further out, I would sort of frame the entire app and say, okay, maybe there's a title here, and maybe there's some navigation that allows me to quickly go from one to-do list to another, and so on. So I will try to start towards the middle and work my way outwards. And doing that allows you to really focus on the core functionality of the app, and it makes it a lot easier to figure out what that Chrome around the functionality should be. Because a lot of times it's easy to design, a really nice looking header or some nice buttons, and then you get to the middle of the app and you realize that maybe those things aren't what you need for these bits of functionality. So let's just quickly customize this to-do list. Let's see, if I have an X, it's a check mark. So we'll say this is a grocery list, and we'll say bread, milk, and eggs. It's a pretty short grocery list. There we go. And I can stretch this out, maybe style it in a number of different ways. In fact, maybe I would actually want this to be more of like a table view in iOS, where you have different table cells and you can scroll through the list that way. So maybe I can make this text a little bit larger and resize that so you can see everything. And I can center it pretty easily, just like that. And then I'll say this is a grocery list. I'll say groceries. And we can resize that as well. There we go. And I can do other things here. Maybe I don't want an add button. I think I can, drag in an icon here. And I think if I double click on that, I can see some icons, and maybe there's some sort of add button here. Yeah, this looks good. There we go. So we'll remove that, and we'll say that's how you add stuff to the to-do list. I can make that larger or smaller. And you can sort of start to build out an interface just like this. It's pretty simple to use, and it helps you communicate ideas very quickly. So from here, what do? Well, let's say maybe you started out with pen and paper mockups like this, and then you moved on to something like Balsamiq Mockups, where you took those pen and paper mockups and maybe cleaned them up a little bit, rethought them, and gave yourself another chance to do another iteration, and then you have them in a digital format where you can share them. Where do you go from there? Well, like I said, I try not to include Photoshop in my process unless I actually need images that are photographs somewhere on the site. Because mocking up a website in Photoshop tends to kind of lock you into Photoshop's tools, which are really meant for editing images and photos, not necessarily mocking up app. A lot of people will use similar tools like Illustrator, which can be a little bit better because they're actually drawing tools that are maybe meant for designing things like that. And that can be good. That could be an alternative to maybe this sort of digital mockup step like Balsamiq Mockups. But unless you're working on a really big team or you need really solid mockups that you can share with stakeholders before you actually start coding something that's fairly complex, you should always try to skip it if you can. Now, at Treehouse, for example, we will create mockups in Photoshop and Illustrator just so that we can easily communicate what the final result is going to be. But if you have something small to medium and you don't really need a super complex, super detailed mockup to explain everything, then you can probably skip that step. So, in that vein, we're going to skip Photoshop and instead actually move on to HTML and CSS. Now, one thing I should add here is that because we are skipping Photoshop, you may want to add some sort of color data into your digital mockup, and that's okay if you want to maybe highlight things or figure out what your color scheme is going to be and maybe color a couple of things in. Balsamiq Mockups allows you to do that, and it's pretty easy to do. But instead, I'd like to jump over to another website here, which is the site for Zurb Foundation. Now, Foundation is a front-end framework that includes HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And if you're not familiar with the idea of a front-end framework, it's basically just a set of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that helps you get started building a website. And typically a framework will include things like a typography reset, a grid, and a bunch of grid classes that you can use to really easily create a layout, and lots of other cool stuff, button stylings, etc. If you're familiar with Bootstrap, this is very similar to that. You can use either one. In fact, you don't have to use Bootstrap or Foundation. You could use really any front-end framework. But I think the important thing here is to use a front-end framework that has a grid system, because that's really what's going to enable you to rapidly prototype a layout. So let's jump into Foundation documentation here, and let's go to the grid just so you can see what I'm talking about. You can create some HTML elements here with the Foundation grid styling. So let me zoom in just so you can see that a little bit better. So basically you would create a row class just like this, and then in each row you would have different sets of columns. Now I'm not going to go into Foundation too specifically here. You can look all of this up in documentation, or of course you can learn about it on Treehouse. But that's basically how the grid system in Foundation works. You create these different sets of rows, and inside of the rows you fill up 12 columns. So you'll notice that each set of these numbers adds up to 12. So what this is saying right here is that small sizes, there should be 3 different groups, and the first one should take up 2 columns, the second one should take up 4, and the last will take up the remaining 6. At larger sizes, this will be 4, 4, and 4, so each column will be evenly sized. And if we scroll down here, you can see that's what this looks like as rendered HTML. So here are those 4 columns, but if I resize it, you'll see that those snap to that, what was it, 2, 4, and 6. And that's right there really the reason why I like working with Foundation up front, is because it's a responsive framework. I really like the way that they do responsive design. It's a mobile-first framework, so in our particular case here, where maybe we are designing a mobile web app that we will then transfer to desktop, or you're just doing mobile-first responsive web design in general, this is a really smart way to work. And if we jump over here, I have another page open where Foundation is self-described as a rapid prototyping tool. I say mockups don't tell a story, build a prototype in no time. And they, again, cite the grid as something that's really easy for creating these super fast prototypes. And they have a couple of examples here that you can look at. So let's see if I can bring one of these up. So for example, you could create a super quick website layout just like this, just by using Foundation and not even writing any of your own styling. And you might be noticing some of these images here. Let me inspect this element so you can see where this is coming from. Let me copy this URL. Let's see. I think I need to edit the HTML here to actually get it. There we go. So Foundation is using a website for these quick prototypes called Placeholdit. And if we head over to Placeholdit, you'll see that you can create these images just by sending some URL parameters. So here is an example. You'd say placeholdit and then /350 by 150, and it would create an image that looks just like this. You can also adjust the format, you can add text, you can change the color, size, and so on. So this is another great tool when you're building, let's see if I can get that back. Oops. When you're building those quick prototypes, that allows you to sort of fill in the blanks, so to speak, and add in places that images should go. So you can create these placeholders and create rapid grids or layouts that way. So that's pretty much it. I basically, just to recap, will start out on pen and paper, listing out all of the features, listing out all of the pages, and sort of breaking things up until I really know what I want to build. Then I will move on to drawing out things on pen and paper, just sort of blocking out the shapes and large areas of the layout. Then I'll clean that up as a digital mockup in a tool like Balsamiq Mockups or maybe even Illustrator, depending on what sort of detail I think I need. And then I will try to skip Photoshop and move straight on to mocking things up with HTML and CSS using a front-end framework like Foundation. So that's pretty much my whole rapid prototyping process. And if we have any questions now, which I'm sure we do, we can hear from Chris Zabriskie, and I can try to answer them for you.
Yes, at the question desk. Excuse me. Elon wants to know if you think that prototyping websites is important for any size website, including very small, maybe mom and pop store kind of client projects, or if just wireframes alone for something smaller would be something you'd recommend.
Definitely. So yes, I think prototyping is really important for almost any website, no matter how small. I have my website up here, which is at nickpettit.com. This is my own personal website. It's super duper simple, and it's this really simple responsive site. Basically, when it's small, it looks like that. And I still made mock-ups for this, even though it's just one page. There's nothing here to navigate to. But I think it's definitely an important step, because taking that little bit of time, even if it's just like 10 minutes, to draw something out on paper or list out what you actually want the site to be, will give you such a much more clear vision as to what you actually need to do, what the work involved it really is. Because if you don't do that small bit of planning, it's really easy to fall into the trap of just following your habits that you've formed over the past couple of projects and just sort of saying, well, we probably need an about page because people will want to know about us, and we need a contact page because they need to contact us, and then we need, this other thing in the footer. Maybe you don't need all of that. Maybe you can just accomplish the exact same goal with just one page or just 2 pages, or maybe something completely different. It's really important to do just some quick paper mock-ups, because it could prevent you from basically just wasting a lot of time. So,
cool.
Yeah.
You knew it was coming. The Foundation versus Bootstrap question. But there's a very large discussion happening of people preferring Bootstrap to Foundation and back and forth. Obviously, Foundation and Bootstrap is sort of a matter of personal taste more than anything else. But in terms of prototyping, you obviously went straight to Foundation. Do you prefer Foundation for prototyping to Bootstrap?
I've used both, and honestly, you can just kind of flip a coin. I am pretty indifferent. I have been using Foundation lately, but I've also used Bootstrap plenty in the past as well. I think, for me personally, it really just comes down to what kind of mood I'm in that day. But I think from a larger perspective, it's almost just personal preference, maybe what other people are comfortable with on the project. Because one thing to keep in mind is that when you're building these rapid prototypes, they could very easily turn into the actual site. There's no reason that you need to just completely throw away that prototype you just built if you can just sort of fill in the blanks and put in the text and the images and the different pieces of functionality that you might need. So I would just talk to maybe other stakeholders on the project or other people that are involved and just see what they're most comfortable with. Or if you're the only person on the project and you're just building it all by yourself, try them both and see which one you like the best. I mean, it's really personal preference at this point. I think they're both very similar with just some very slight differences.
Definitely. People are going back and forth about it.
Yeah.
Joseph wants to know what the essentials are to great website design prototypes. So obviously it's going to vary from project to project, but when you're talking about, in general, a design prototype for a website, what are some of the key things you need to include, you want to make sure that you're including with everything that you're doing? What kind of information are you trying to get across?
Sure. Well, at each step, when you go from paper to digital mockup to HTML and CSS, you're obviously including an increasing amount of detail. So at that first sort of pen and paper stage, I will try to just block out the major portions of the layout. And that could be something as simple like, okay, I know I'm going to have a header here, a sidebar here, and this is my main content area, and maybe there's some things inside that main content area. So it'll be super rough, very broad, and by just sort of drawing out those shapes very quickly, you can rearrange things and say, well, what if the sidebar was actually where the navigation lives? Or what if we had no navigation at all and it was just sort of this scrolling one-page site? You can very quickly draw out a lot of stuff and throw it away because you didn't spend that much time on it. That's why I like starting with pen and paper. Once I move to a digital mockup, I kind of am a little bit more settled on the broad shape of things, and I know where the different major pieces of the site are going to go, and I will start to get a little bit more detailed and say, okay, I know the navigation is going to be at the top of the website. Here are the 4 or 5 different navigation items, and it's going to be a horizontal list, or maybe it will be a drop-down menu, like a little vertical list. And that's the point where I'll start to kind of get into some of those medium level details. And it's when I actually get into the HTML and CSS that I finally do have to settle and make a decision and say, okay, the navigation really is going to go here. It's going to be a horizontal list, and it's going to be at the top right in this spot. And it's going to be exactly this size. And I need to fill it in with these images or these different pieces of text. So that's a really good question. But yeah, at each step I will increase the level of detail. I don't flesh it all out on pen and paper and then just create a mock-up or a HTML, CSS prototype for the heck of it. It's each step has a purpose.
Vamsi would like to know if there are any free or open source tools that are similar to Balsamiq that you would recommend. Obviously, Balsamiq is a paid product. Is there anything that you've used that's free or open source, or at least cheaper, that you do recommend? Because you seem to really prefer Balsamiq, though.
I do. That's just because I've been using Balsamiq for years and years, for a long time. In terms of free tools, I'm so set in my ways with Balsamiq, I honestly don't know, which is kind of bad because maybe there is a tool out there I'm not aware of that would suit my needs slightly better. But I'm sure people in the chat are probably more knowledgeable about this than me. I'm not really sure. I've seen a couple of things, but nothing that quite matches the ease of use and convenience of Balsamiq, where they have these pre-built components you can just kind of drop in really easily that are meant for web design or meant for mobile mockups.
We have some recommendations in the chat for Pencil, a tool called Pencil.
I'll have to check that out.
And let's see, Dana, I wanted to know if you have used Sketch at all. And if you have, does that make you more inclined to create more high-fidelity mockups with a tool like Sketch?
Do I use Sketch? Not really. I mean, I have tried out Sketch a little bit, and I'm still on the fence about it. I may start to work that into my own workflow a little bit more. I know there's some people that just swear by it. They just love using Sketch. I think, again, that's one of those things where it's personal preference. It's whatever you feel most efficient with. I've been using Balsamiq mockups for years, so I'm very efficient with that, and I know where everything is. But if you feel like you're totally new to this and you want to give a bunch of different tools a try, then yeah, try out Sketch. I mean, that could definitely lead to higher fidelity mockups. I mean, it does have a lot more detail, obviously, than Balsamiq mockups. So how's that for a non-answer?
That's a very good non-answer. I appreciate it. And that's our last question.
Oh, okay. Well, thanks everybody so much for tuning in. If you want to learn more about us, you can check us out at teamtreehouse.com, which of course is the best way to learn web design, web development, mobile business, and so much more. I'm Nick Pettit at NickRP on Twitter, and we will see you real soon.